Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Talking Bottom. Hello, Norbury Theatre. Good afternoon, Bottom fans. Hey.
We are absolutely delighted to be back at the Rik Mayall Comedy Festival.
I'm surprised we were allowed back after last year. Someone clogged the dressing room toilet.
Yes, well, I was very nervous, wasn't I?
I think I could smell your nerves again from here, to be honest.
So you had the egg.
We are Talking Bottom, podcasters and authors of the book of the same name. And what we do is we delve into comedy, often centered around the work of Rik Mayall and Edmondson. As the title may suggest, we first delved into Rik and Ade's bottom deeply, but recently we produced two podcast series that delve into the work of one of their most iconic series, The Young Ones.
Yes, we were honoured to be here at the Norbury Theatre last year at the inaugural Rik Mayall Comedy Festival with director of Bottom, Ed Bye. Then in summer, we went up to the Edinburgh Fringe to talk to the best landlord in all of Hammersmith, Dick Head, or Lee Corns, his actual name is.
And then our book was published just in time to fill everyone's Christmas stockings. Copies are available from us to buy after the show. Just a little plug there. And are you going to model it? There we go. That's what it looks like to anyone who doesn't know yet.
Shameless.
Yeah, shameless plugging. But yes, it's a thrill to return to the festival and be back on this stage. This stage is hallowed ground, if you don't know. This is the stage that a very young Rik Mayall made his first ever performance.
Yeah, it's a very special venue. All the staff and volunteers here have been working very hard already. And they've got the whole run ahead of them. So can we please give them a round of applause? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
But now to business. We want to bring on our guest. A man who, when I was growing up, I thought made pretty much all the television that was made on TV. And then when I grew up, I found out that he was one of a group of very talented people who just made all the TV that was worth watching. Along with other people like Ed Bye and John Plowman and John Lloyd and people like that. The impact he's had on British comedy and popular culture in general, I think, is really quite remarkable. Yeah. This is the man we consider to be the godfather of alternative comedy. As both a producer and a director, let's take a look at some of his finest work.
Paul Jackson.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Jackson!
Hi.
Welcome, Paul.
My pleasure.
Mr. Jackson, if you prefer. So last year, Ed Bye told us that...
Ed
Bye. He told us that he taught you everything you know. What do you could corroborate that story?
No, he was the kind of junior sandwich getter runner, and then I just moved on to far higher things, and I said to him, "Can you tidy this up?"
Can you clear up the...
He did okay, yeah.
Well, in all seriousness, it's an absolute pleasure to be talking Bottom and indeed all of some of the greatest comedy of all time.
There's no Benidorm on there. I thought you'd have Benidorm on the reel.
We haven't.
There's just not enough space on the reel. But yes, we, of course, did have the honour of interviewing you for our podcast in 2022. We're not going to cover all of the topics we covered then because we don't want to go over old ground. So just so you know, we're going to try and cover new things. But for the benefit of everyone in the room here today, we'd love, Paul, if you could just summarise, if you can, how you began at the BBC and what was the show that you first cut your teeth on?
I started as a runner. They used to call them, they were called call boys, and that's what they were called. And they were all men. And this is a true story. And then they decided that maybe they should let some women apply for the job, but they couldn't call them call girls. So that's when they started calling floor assistants. I mean, seriously, that was literally the conversation. So they called us floor assistants, and we got the coffee, and you just went in on studio days. You weren't in the production office or anything. Anyway, I started there, and always wanted to get into comedy and entertainment, which I eventually did. into the department run by the legendary Bill Cotton, who was my mentor and eventually a very good friend of mine. Fantastic guy, who ran the biggest entertainment business outside of Hollywood, really, in the Western world, outside of Bollywood and Hollywood and so on. And I got in with him, and very luckily, I'd started as a floor assistant, and I worked up every grade on a show called The Two Ronnies, which is really where I kind of learnt my trade, to be honest.
What a show to start on.
Well,
Yeah.
how lucky to just get that first gig as the runner, and then I seemed to like, they like me and I like them, and then I was at AFM, and then I was the first, and then I was the vision mixer and director, producer, executive producer. So
and it's right that you worked on the last series of Steptoe and Son, isn't it? That must have been a dream job.
In the AFM stage, which is the kind of junior, most lowliest production office part, I worked on they decided to revive Steptoe, which had all been shot in black and white. So they shot this one last series in colour.
Yeah.
And I was in charge of the props. Well, you can imagine that room, if you remember Steptoe. So that was quite a responsibility. But it was brilliant. Ray and Alan were, Gordon and Simpson were, again, you're just working with legends, and they were the people who kind of formed how British television comedy looks,
I imagine for a lot of people in this room, that would be the equivalent of us getting a job on The Young Ones or Bottom or something like that. You're sort of working with your heroes.
I think, well, the difference was, Ray and Alan by that time were legendarily famous. I mean, they made Hancock, they wrote all Tony Hancock stuff. And then Hancock did a big moody and said, I don't want to write, you're getting more publicity than I am. And of course, never made a funny show or film again after that. Eventually killed himself in his dressing room. So, be careful about, just understand what your talent is and who's feeding it. The thing about Young Ones, by the time you'd got there's only 2 series with a year in between. So by the time you'd seen it and been a fan, you'd be like
have been able to.
Pretty much the same team did both series.
So we'd be remiss not to ask you to touch on what led to the Young Ones being commissioned for the full series. So what I understand is you shot the pilot in winter of 81 or 82.
I can't do dates. Probably
Sure,
81.
around that
When
sort
did
of
Channel 4 go on air?
82.
So it would be the winter of 81, yeah.
Okay.
So they shot the pilot, yeah.
You'd shown it to a former colleague, Mark Boland, who left the BBC and went to Channel 4. And tell us what happened next.
So Mike was, there was a conference, the BBC, very BBC type, young people, let's do a young people's conference. And I went along then, we shot this pilot. Now, by this time I'd already been told, we've got more expensive flops in the vault. This will nothing will happen. And I'd have to phone the guys and say, sorry guys, they just don't get it. But I went to this conference and I showed about 10 minutes of the pilot. And Mike Boland, his name was, he came up to me and said, I thought, I knew him, but I thought, he's quite interested, a lot of chat. About 2 months later, it's announced that he's going to be head of entertainment and comedy at Channel 4, the brand new Channel 4, which was about a year from going on air at that point. Of course, it was obvious why he wanted to know all these people. So about 3 months after that, Jeremy Isaacs, who ran Channel 4 for the first 10 years, did this huge press announcement. And part of that was the first night scheduling will be this. And it was something else and a very strange drama called Water. And then Five Go Mad in Dorset, the first ever comic strip film. And suddenly the next morning, literally, I got a phone call from the people who'd said, well, okay, this will be in the vault, saying, they're the same people, aren't they, that are in the Young Ones? And I said, yeah, can you get 5 more done by the autumn so we can beat them? Because they came on air in November, I think.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, we didn't beat them. They went out on the first night, but we had 6. And so our series went out the next week and ran for 6 weeks.
So I've heard them say they were in competition with themselves in that sort of
moment.
Yeah,
they were. It was kind of, it was a very different thing. Comic strip's a very different thing. It's a single auteurs medium. It was run by Peter Richardson. Peter's very much a director, writer. Before, it's an authored piece. Quite the reverse of Rik and Ben, say, for example, although Ben is the writer and director and performer. And so it was a very different piece. But I don't think there was much competition. I think they, we clearly had 6 shows and we built a big reputation, and Comic Strip didn't do another one for took 5 or 6 months to do another one. So there wasn't much competition. I think they were just very glad these people who never had any work before at all are suddenly on 2 channels and being asked to do
Yeah, I think because of it was a week apart, and obviously knowing the backstory. I mean, can I ask, do you think that sequence of events would have happened if it wasn't for the fact that Nigel Planer appeared on Boom Boom Out Go the Lights without Peter Richardson? Do you think that was the catalyst for
No,
the comic strip?
the reason that so I was by this time I was I must have been a first assistant on the two Ronnies, and the BBC at that time used to run these brilliant training courses for directors, and I did 4 or 5 weeks studio direction, 4 or 5 weeks film direction. I mean, can you imagine? You know, just for free. You know, you just go and shoot this stuff, and it was brilliant. And I did a final exercise, and just after I'd done my final exercise, I went to the Comedy Store for the first time and saw these guys. And I came back and said to my boss, it's very funny, the Comedy Store was just off Wardour Street. It was a strip club called the Nell Gwyn most of the time, and Friday and Saturday nights it was the Comedy Store. And I can't remember how old I was by then, 30 something, but when I was 16, 17, I'd walked up Wardour Street and gone to the Marquee Club, which was almost, you know, it's a block away. And I'd gone in there and seen Man for a Man and The Who and Georgie Fame, and come out and said to anybody who wanted to listen, you know, these people are going to beat the world. These people are going to be world famous. And I remember the first night at the Comedy Store thinking, these people are going to be not world famous. Comedy doesn't translate like music does, but these people are going to be very, very successful. And I was very taken with it. And I went to my boss and said, look, we ought to do something about this. You know, this is really happening. Turns out it wasn't happening nearly as much as I thought. There were about 5 people who had 5 minutes each. So it turned into a bit of a problem. So he said, well, look, we've got an empty studio. These are the golden days of the BBC. You know, Harry Mortimer's big brass band has just had to cancel because he's got flu, and we've got 2 studio days. And I've seen this little theatre, this little cafe theatre thing. Go and have a look at that. If you do that on one day, you can have a... So we did Boom Boom. And it was my first ever job, and I was very naive and very stupid. And I had seen, obviously, Coyote and Outer Limits. I mean, working as double acts. But the standout thing, there's no question, the standout thing was Rik doing the poems and Nigel doing Neil. Yeah. And Peter, you know, the sketches with Peter weren't as good, and the sketches with Ade, I hadn't at that point seen Dangerous Brothers. Right. If I'd seen Dangerous Brothers, it wouldn't have been a problem. Anyway, so I went ahead and I very stupidly and with very little grace asked Rik and Nigel to do it and not Peter and Ade. And that caused a lot of friction from Peter. I mean, Ade wasn't thrilled, but he was much more grown up about it. Peter was livid. And I tried to make it up a bit later because we did Boom Boom 2, and they all 4 were in it. But Peter was really pissed off. So I don't think that created the comic strip. I think what did create the comic strip was us making the pilot and the BBC saying they don't want it. Yeah. And Peter was then able to say, well, I told you all along, you know, I mean, you did this bloody Boom Boom, nobody watched it. It got the lowest ratings, I think, of the BBC had a measure called AI, which is audience appreciation rather than the actual numbers. And it got like I think the lowest ever was 33 and we got 25 or something, you know. So,
but you'd given them the taste, I guess, for the TV. You had been the person responsible for them having that first.
That's right.
TV,
so I did the
giving
Boom Boom.
them the courage, I presume,
that's
to
right.
pitch the comic strip to Channel 4.
But then,
yeah.
So that created, and you know, to be honest, if you had half an understanding of anybody under 40, I mean, Bolland wasn't, you know, he was a very nice guy, he's a good friend of mine, but I mean, he's not a genius. He looked at it, it was funny, you know, I mean, and he made a note, and then he went to Channel 4 and said, right, we're going to do this. So that it wouldn't, the young ones, absolutely no question, young ones would not have happened had Jeremy Isaacs not announced comic strip. Would Rik Mayall have been a star? Absolutely, no question about it. He was already doing Kevin Turvey for Kick Up the 80s. Would Ben Elton have been an absolutely massive creative? Of course. Would Nigel and I think Peter's a more acquired taste. I mean, I'm not sure that the popular TV would have been Peter's natural home if it hadn't been for that. But they'd all made their way, but they suddenly all came through. Yeah. And of course, Dawn and Jenny and Jim Barclay and
I think you're being very humble, Paul. I think you're not taking the credit there.
No. Look,
it
was funny.
Yes,
it was
right.
funny.
There were stars,
you know?
and you discovered them.
So we did it, and so we got commissioned. But of course, then I've only said this in the recent few times I've come out. What then happened was, I'm now pretty 100% certain, I can't swear. So Rik then said to me, look, Paul, you know, Peter's really pissed off, but he won't do Mike. Because the script was written, obviously, for the 4 of them, Nigel and Peter and Rik and Ade. and he said he just won't do it, he won't work with you. And I'm 99.9% certain he was saying to Peter, he just won't have you in it, he just won't do it. So
Right.
Rik engineered it, is my definite belief. However, having said that, it's very intelligent that he did for two reasons. Number one, there wasn't room for two alpha males in that room, and there would have been a lot of friction, and I doubt we'd have got the second series. I think it would have been too much. And secondly, and Rik wasn't going to concede the floor to anybody, and Peter was a much quieter, much more, but a more manipulative, it's got a pejorative sense, I don't mean that, but he wanted to be in charge. He was the auteur. And the second reason is it just wouldn't have worked. I mean, Peter was not an audience comedian. He did stand up with Nigel as Outer Limits, but he wouldn't have gone into the studio and done those shows in front of an audience like eventually Chris did, and the other three did. So it was the right decision by Rik.
Well, I think it worked out well for everyone in the end. I think we're all lucky that you went into that club that night and discovered them, and thus the course of comedy in the UK was changed. We know that The Young Ones was very anarchic, and part of the reason for that was that the writers didn't really know the constraints of television, and you actually encouraged that and fed into that and said, just write what you want, and we'll find a way to make it happen. Paul selected some clips here for us today, and I think these first two, we're going to play two. These first two are good examples of that, of sort of writing without limits, and then finding a way to make it happen. So one of those, the first clip was from the first episode, and the explosion I think was from the second. That's a hell of a way to kick a sitcom off, isn't it?
Well, so they've been talking about this. By this time, the comic strip was also performing at Roman's Review Bar, another strip club. There's obviously some connection with that. Some reason they wanted to be around the strip clubs. This talk of the four of them being obvious, they weren't that long out of uni, any of them. So the talk was, well, Nigel didn't go to uni, he was at drama school, but let's do this comedy and Alexi will play the landlord. It all kind of worked and fitted together and we all knew what it was. If you read Ben's autobiography, has anybody read Ben's autobiography? You really should. It's really, really good.
It is.
It's also pretty much accurate. They had this idea and they talked to me about it and I said, well, I'd love to see a script. And Ben wrote what was pretty nearly the first episode overnight. They discussed it with Rik. He went home, he phoned Rik the next morning and he said, I've done it. And Rik said, what took you so long, Farty? Which is how he used to talk to him. And it was written in biro on A4 and he brought it into me and long story, but anyway, we got it commissioned. And they immediately started saying, because they'd never been anywhere near a television studio, any of them, and they started saying to me, look, tell us what we can't do. Can we blow up the wall and can he come in on a thing like that? And I said, look, forget about that. Stop. This is the BBC, and in those days it was the BBC. They'll do anything. We can do anything. I'll tell you if we get to something we can't do. You write exactly what you want to write. That's the whole point. I was working on the two Ronnies. I had the two Ronnies lighting, the two Ronnies visual effects, makeup, wardrobe. All the two Ronnies team came and worked on Young Ones. Yeah. And I said, we'll find a way to do it. And if we really, really can't, I'll tell you. So they wrote exactly what they wanted to write. And I don't think they did, but interestingly, in the first series, there's an episode, well, it may even be you're the expert on boring. There's a sequence where a carrot and a chip dance on the greasy plates.
Right at the very beginning, before they've woken up.
What's it in?
Boring, the very beginning.
So they did that. So that took us 4.5, 5 hours one morning, because nowadays you just CGI it, but we literally had to get blue screen, a huge giant plate, 2 actual roller skaters. I mean, it was just ludicrous. But we did it, and they came to me and said, look, Paul, you've got to tell us, because it's all very well saying we can do what we want, but we've just wasted 4 hours of studio time and we could have been doing better and funnier things. It's going to be a 30-second cut, so you tell us. But I don't remember ever saying to them, no, we can't work out a way to do that. We did exactly what we wanted. So, which was fantastic, to be able to do that. And then the other big thing is, if you were going to do anything even appropriate to that, so the method of sitcom was very, very rigid and fixed, pretty much the same at ITV as it was at the BBC. You rehearsed for 5 days in a rehearsal room with marked up floor and props and everything. You went into the studio for 1 day, you rehearsed all day, audience came in at 7:30, you record the show in order, that's the show, that's the half-hour comedy. We cheated that by doing it under variety, so we got 2 days, which we could never have done that stuff in 1 day. So that was that. But now in an ordinary comedy, if you were going to do even one trick where somebody's going to walk through a wall, you'd pre-record it. I mean, you wouldn't risk doing that in front of an audience. So you'd pre-record and then you roll it back in off VT and show the audience so they follow the story okay, yeah? And we said from the start, no, we've got to do this. Because otherwise most of the show will be bloody played in. So that I always remember that first night, and that is the first episode, the pilot episode. We'd got friends. The audience was friends. In fact, for nearly all 12 shows, the audience was friends. You couldn't get a ticket very quickly, and it was just everybody wanted. So you had a friendly audience, but they sat there and they kind of, I think some of them had been to stuff before, and they kind of expected to. And I remember, because that's very near the beginning, and I just remember and it's cut down so much on there. Ade comes through the thing. Well, the whole studio went.
Yeah. That's timed it. That's 10 minutes into the episode, so you wouldn't expect another character to turn up at that point.
That's right. You don't, and you said he had to come through the kitchen wall with a leg in his hand and kick the thing off the wall, and it all just went, as a thing. And people were literally, and I remember the techies. Sorry, quite hay fever. The techies in all the prep, because it took a lot of prep. It was pushing the system. It really was pushing the system. But the techies saying, "No, Paul, we love it. No, don't know. They can do what they want. You tell us, we'll make it work."
It's brilliant that you got such a good reaction from the crew and the audience in the studio. But we understand that there was some internal doubt at the BBC. For example, this is you received notes from colleagues at the BBC. Like this is one that we found at the BBC archive. This is an internal memo sent to Paul Jackson from Ian Davidson, who was a prolific comedy writer who wrote on things like The Frost Report and The Two Ronnies and things like that. And he says, since this isn't a sketch show, I do think that some trace of a story, a continuing interest, must emerge sooner than page 39. The council are going to knock the house down. This might also help answer my other basic objection. If the situation is crazy and the characters are all crazy, that's one crazy too many. We need one recognisable element at least. Have the writers and cast faced up to the fact that your set will be realistic? The imagination is the stuff of the theatre, but television makes bed-sitting rooms shockingly real and mundane. Again, this uneasiness of mine might be answered by the earlier introduction of the story. That's quite a letter to receive, isn't it?
Well, so look, you first of all, you've got to know Ian Davidson was in charge of the BBC script unit. So it was part of his job really to, he didn't have to, he didn't have a veto on it or anything, but if you were doing a new script, the head of comedy would like, or the head of writing in this case, would like him to have a look at it and give him his notes. So that came to me, but it would have been copied to Robin Nash or showed to Robin Nash. But secondly, Ian was also the script editor on The Two Ronnies, so I knew him really well. So he was a friend. He was the man who used to assemble all the news items and he wrote quite a lot with a guy called Peter Vincent. They wrote sketches, and actually Peter and Ian created Sorry, the Ronnie Corbett vehicle that ran for years, and wrote it. So it's not like it's some draconian overlord writing to me. And quite frankly, I'm almost certainly, I don't remember replying to him. I probably went around to him and said, Ian, just don't get it, just forget it. It's fine. Yeah. But of course he was right, because he's talking about the pilot, and the pilot got put in the vault, so he's not wrong.
It's funny though, isn't it, how, he is right in terms of anyone who's studied sort of writing would say, yes, you need to have the inciting incident earlier on, and yet it works so well in this context, doesn't it?
Well, and that's the point. They didn't know how, they thought they knew, they very much, Lisa was very strong in it. We want to parody the sitcom. We want to deconstruct the form of the sitcom. That's part of the joke, and the talking animals and all that stuff. But they did. So Oil is the best example. Oil is an absolute classic sitcom plot, isn't it? We discover oil in the cellar. Everybody reacts in their different ways to oil. Then we find out there's no oil there. An American writer, I never remember his name, but he once said, a sitcom's really simple. He's talking about American sitcom. You chase a cat up a tree in the first act, each of your four main characters reacts in the typical way that they will react, and at the end of the cat walks down on his own. That's how you do sitcom. And they wanted to take the piss out of that, and Oil is specifically intended to be a piss take of that thing. So, you know, that, I mean, he was doing his job, and I paid no attention.
We've got other letters that are equally dubious, but a bit more polite. Show another one.
I don't remember these.
This
still.
is from Keith Clement, who is head of
Oh my
programming.
God, Keith! Oh my God.
This is before shooting the pilot, dated the 4th of September 1981. Thank you very much for letting me see this script. It's certainly different. If you pull this off, my estimation of you will go even higher.
Keith became a good friend of mine. Became a very senior executive. I think he ran TV South at one point. And I tell you what's interesting. So he's head of program planning. You know, these are the schedulers and the guys behind the report. And what I'm obviously doing at this point is trying to get as many people on board as I can. I'm trying to work the BBC political system, because if the head of planning doesn't like your show, doesn't support your show, you're not going to get trailers. You're not going to get plugged. You're not going to get. So I'm new Keith a bit, obviously, and I've obviously gone to him and said, "Hey Keith, this is quite good, don't you think? Get them buy in early, you know." And you know, to be fair, we did pull it off. Here it is, Keith, and they did. I mean, it got very, very well supported within the BBC.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, speaking of obviously some of the people higher up at the BBC having doubts about the show, when we last spoke, you told us about an essay that Rik and Lisa, and I believe Ben must have had a hand across it, that they had to write in defence of the young ones, explaining why it was funny. Now, can you tell us what you remember about that particular conversation with Jim Moyer?
Well, I remember that by this time, Robin's given way to Jim Moyer. So I presume, was it written before the second season?
Yes, it was before the first
one. So we've done
aired.
the first season, right? And Robin Nash has now given way to Jim Moyer. And they've commissioned a second season, but there's still worry about it. You know, it's violent, it's rude, it's toilet humor, da-da-da. And he called me, and I think Rik and Lisa, Ben never wasn't bothered with all this shit. So he called us in, Jim, and he said, look, I kind of need an answer to people who are asking me difficult questions higher up the chain, and, you know, why have we recommissioned it, and isn't it all a bit under the arm? And there was a bit of a discussion, and he kind of said, well, would you write that in an essay? He said to Rik and Lisa. And again, I say that, you know, Lisa was literally just out of uni. And she said, Lisa wrote the essay. She said, yeah, I'll write it. And she went off in about 3 days and she produced this document, which I gave to Jim. And that was the end of that conversation. That shut that whole thing up. Yeah. But I had totally forgotten about it. About 20 years later, somebody was making, you know, an archive for him and said, oh, no, I know. I said, how do you know about it? They said, well, it's in the archives at Evesham.
Well,
just around here. They're in Evesham, the BBC archives.
Yeah. After our interview, I visited the BBC archive when we were researching our Talking Bottom book, and I found it. I
haven't seen this since I gave it to Jim Moyer.
Yeah. There's two versions. There's a draft version with Rik and Lisa's handwritten notes on it, and then a more sort of final typed up version. It's very thoughtfully written. It starts by saying, we have been asked to explain what we are trying to do with this programme. Then there's a sort of overview introduction followed by three main sections. And those sections are language, violence, and grossness.
It's written like a university paper, you know.
It's homework, wasn't it?
Now, rather than us read out sections of this essay, we thought who better to get someone to read it than one of the authors. So a few weeks ago, we spoke to Lise Mayer for an interview for an upcoming podcast. It's going to be out in a few weeks. And she very kindly agreed to read a few sections. So this first part is an introduction on moral stance, and then it goes into the first defence on language.
It's never been seen before.
I've never seen this.
On moral stance, we would maintain that there is contained in the show, in contrast to the deliberate omission of the kind of sexist and racist material so often seen on our screens, an overall value judgment and moral statement, and that this, to a large extent, is the source of its humour. The 1960s saw the emergence of young people as a new political, social and economic force. Amongst students in particular, it was the time of radicalism, active campaigning, and the promulgation of new ideals and ideas. The youth of the late 70s and early 80s have inherited the privileges won by the previous generation without accepting any of their responsibilities. Universities were sanctuaries of apathy and hedonism when the authors were there in the late 70s, and the students in the young ones are each caricature versions of today's typical student. Thus, the four of them are all examples of the me generation. All four comic monsters of self-obsession, they are full of slogans and received attitudes which they have never thought out for themselves. Even Neil the hippie is only a relic of the 60s in terms of the posture he adopts. Their solipsistic view of the world makes any real interaction between the characters impossible. Armour-plated ciphers concealing a social vacuum, they can never modify their stance and thus cannot adapt to any reality but their own. As spectators, we recognise the distance between their failed adjustment to reality and that which is necessary, and we laugh. Ultimately, the four characters provide as strong a condemnation of the attitudes they personify as did Alf Garnett, or for that matter, Volpone or Tartuffe. 1. Language. Since there is quite rightly no fixed code of acceptable language for television usage, one can only judge by the standards of the output of the time. It seems to us quite plain that our use of bad language is well within the bounds set by such contemporary products as BA in music, Not the Nine, Kenny Everett, The Dave Allen Show, etc., and indeed suffers very little by comparison with even older examples, such as Till Death Us Depart. Furthermore, we would argue quite firmly that it is well within what seems to be the accepted norm for feature films and documentaries. In addition, we would make the normal observation that it represents no more than an accurate portrayal of the conversation which would be used by the characters portrayed in real life, considerably and quite rightly toned down for television broadcast. We certainly have no specific interest in pushing back the barriers of censorship in this area, since we do not consider it to be of great importance.
See, now, if only I'd just pitched that. I mean, you'd have to buy the show, wouldn't you, after you did that?
How does it feel hearing those words again after all these years?
Well, it's just kind of exercise in futility, isn't it? You know, I mean, she's written a very credible. I remember when I got it thinking, bloody hell, Lise, you know, you've done what they asked
Sort of
you.
flexing their intellectualism, I think.
She sat down and written an academic essay on her own work, and it had exactly the desired effect, because I never heard anything about it again. In fact, I presumed Jim had thrown it in the waste paper basket.
Did you
I
have any input?
heard it was at Evesham, but isn't it mad that and you've just seen the clip of the party episode where they find the Tampax in Jenny's bag, and that was one of the. We only ever cut one scene in the whole 12 episodes. We cut one 5-second scene, which I'll tell you in a minute, the whole time. But we came very near to having to cut the Tampax thing. And Jim had said, it's in season 2, and Jim had said to me, you know, look, I think this is a bit near the knuckle, mate, honestly. And I said, well, I think I'm going to have to bring Rik and Lisa in particularly, because you're going to have to explain to Lisa why we can't do that. And again, she went for it. You know, she said, this is something that actually over 50% of the human population experience for over 50% of their lives. It is an absolutely central part of who we are and our being. Also, it's probably not the case anymore in your generation, but in my generation, the absolute golden rule was never look inside a lady's handbag. You never look inside a lady's handbag. And I had no idea why, you know, but this is obviously why.
Apparently it happened to Lisa at a party.
Oh, there you
similar.
go. I didn't know that
apparently
bit.
That
but
is
she
based on
literally,
true
and Jim sat there and said, okay, fair point.
I mean, it's fantastic the way she and Rik, it sums up the me generation. It's an incredible comment, and as you say, you know, she's examined, you know, what it is about those four characters. Do you think the young ones endures in popularity? Because really, what it means to be young, selfish, self-absorbed, hasn't really changed all that much.
The me generation became a phrase that we all then, from that essay, we started using, and it, you know, I mean, it's got more and more me as time goes on, it seems to me. But I think that's right. I think the reason that it does, you know, comedy ages very, very quickly, to be honest, most comedy. And I think the fact is we don't have anarchists, and we don't have Cliff Richard, and we don't have hippies anymore. But we do have young people who spend a lot of their lives proselytizing and shouting about and declaiming about Palestine or whatever it may be when they actually know nothing about it. I'm not saying that anybody who is pro-Palestine or whatever doesn't know anything about it, but I'm saying there are a lot of people who put on, they go out and say, you know, from the river to the sea, and they don't actually, from the mountains to the sea, and they don't actually know what the river or the sea is. So that kind of Rik, particularly, you know, right on people while knowing absolutely nothing about the politics or the social situation, that's very real. The kind of hippie, you know, they're very real characters.
They're enduring, and we still relate to them.
And we still relate to them,
absolutely.
and that's why I think they're still funny.
We are going to hear from another section of the essay now. We are going to hear about what they had to say about the violence in the show. If we can play the next clip, please.
Violence. The violence in the programme is intentionally over the top, unreal, non-harmful. Tom and Jerry, Keystone Cops, slapstick. To see someone sneeze blowing a door off its hinges in a ball of fire, and then to see that person walk away unharmed, or to see a man struck violently around the head with a cricket bat and then respond immediately with a retort, can hardly be considered threatening or frightening to even the most childlike imagination. Slapstick has been an essential element of comedy since the earliest days of classical theatre, and the basis of slapstick is violence. Real violence is never funny, and surely the contention that the young ones could either incite its viewers to violence or cause them to feel threatened by it is more accurately applied to that succession of programmes, Starsky and Hutch, The Professionals, The Sweeney, which seek to glorify violence rather than ridicule it.
The violence thing was really very, very simple, actually, because we did have conversations about language, and we did have conversations about toilet humour, and the Tampax thing we had conversations about. But the violence was always, it's Tom and Jerry, you know, he cuts his finger off and
It's back.
it's spurting blood, and the next minute
What I love about that is the next scene, he says, what a boring day. He cut his
exactly,
finger off.
He cut his finger off, but
Yeah.
that was the whole point. The
Yeah.
violence was completely, and she's, you know, he kicks his head down the railway track, for God's sake. I mean, you know,
It's so
completely...
astute, it's so eloquently written, and obviously read out by Lisa there. And it is very interesting to me that, you know, comedy seems to come under all this scrutiny. Even outrageously cartoonish violence like that will be, why is this funny? Why is this okay? But then, as they, you know, say, Starsky and Hutch, The Professionals, they're glamorizing violence. Why aren't you
These shows,
asking them to
these cop
justify
shows,
it?
the Sweeney and so
Yeah.
on, they're all over. In fact, I should just tell you about your second clip there, that when Rik lights the stove. I mean, we couldn't have made these shows these days. There's absolutely no way they'd allow us to make it. At that time, there was one guy, his name was Gavin Burkett, in charge of the whole BBC television studios as head of health and safety. One guy. And he always had a suit on, tie, and he'd come around with his clipboard every now and then, you know, surprise visit. I mean, one guy. And we were blowing things up and dropping people off towers. And what happened with that scene was, and it's happened famously on other occasions. So the visual effects guys loaded up the charge and went to supper. You know, there's a big supper break. We set everything, go and have supper, come back and do the show. And a second guy, not realizing it had been loaded it up again. So there was a double charge on it. So when Rik does that, it's twice what it should be. And he was really, but
He's not acting in that bit, is he?
He's not acting, but he doesn't miss a beat, does he?
No.
They were so good. He just carries straight on. But it was so, when I looked at the slow-mo, I just thought, oh, come on, I've got to show you this. You know, he literally, I mean, and the other one that I particularly remember, do you remember the episode when Hellenbach turns up and it's all about Rik's virginity, Rik's a virgin?
Yes.
And they're arguing in the bed and the bed falls through the ceiling, yeah? So this is well into the second series now. So the audience are very used to this going on. And we talked about we should pre-record. No. The boys said, no, we've got to do it live. And with these big, difficult stunts, I always used to insist on doing it myself before. I'd say to the visual effects guys and them, look, you know, hang on, I just want to know what this feels like.
We have
so
got that clip to play in a little bit as well.
Yeah,
We'll
you
maybe
was there,
come
wasn't
back
it?
to
So
it,
I just
yeah,
lay
we'll
in the bed and it went down. Anyway, on the night they'd rehearsed it, you know, and it's just charges that fire and the thing falls down. They both really hurt themselves. They both landed really badly, and Ade actually had a bad back for several months after. But you watch it,
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
there's
Don't miss a beat,
there's
do
no
they?
cut in that shot. It falls to the floor.
All right.
They get up and carry on.
We're
His
going to
intro.
be playing that shortly. But
Well, you look. There is no joy in that.
One
Real
more,
tough.
Lisa.
Yeah.
They are both injured.
Yeah.
Aid reasonably seriously.
Got one more
As
thing
of course
from
he was
Lisa
on
now.
Dangerous Brothers a few years later. So.
Yeah, the fire thing was a famous one, wasn't it? Right, so one more clip from Lisa now, which is about the show's apparent grossness. I don't know what they're talking about.
Toilet mouth Elton.
Grossness. This is the most difficult point to answer, since it is both the most intangible and the most subjective. It has been our experience that certain interpretations of the scripts have arisen from the mistaken prejudice that we are in some way trying to purvey gross, offensive, and shocking material. For example, Mirror journalist Ken Irwin condemns the series as four-letter comedy without having seen a single episode. The BBC script typist who returned the completed manuscripts with the word runt typed as cunt, want typed as wank, etc., while complaining about the offensive nature of the material she has been asked to handle. It is perhaps this kind of misunderstanding which has led to people misinterpreting a character's comic attempt at a press-up in a way which has astounded everyone concerned with the recording of the project. We would ask you to understand our feelings on this subject, since we have all had to learn to live with this prejudice from the time of the Comedy Store's inception in 1979.
That's true. The script, you get the script in from them, and it's not formatted properly. So it goes to, in those days, went to the script unit, and we did several times get. They didn't complain. It would come back and it would be, you'd read it and it would say wank, and it wasn't, it was want.
Yeah.
And there was one time when it said cunt. And then we heard that one of the typists has complained about she was being asked to type.
It really does seem that the real problem was that there was almost a willful misinterpretation, or at least a mistrust of the intent behind the young creatives.
I think you've absolutely got it. A mistrust of the intent.
They thought they were trying to corrupt young minds. I mean, at the time, I think it upset Lisa, Ben, and Rik quite a lot that they were being assumed that's what they were trying
the
to do.
language and the violence and all that, the moral stance, if you like, they were completely comfortable with, because they were happy in their own skin. They knew what they were doing and what they were trying to do, and they didn't care. The grossness really upset all three of them, because it wasn't gross and it wasn't attempting to be gross, and it was. I mean, come on, we've all lived in student digs, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
But the BBC was still people would still say about senior people, oh, he had a very good war, he was a Spitfire pilot, he was the Spitfire pilot, he had a very good war. I mean, it was still run by people who'd fought in the Battle of Britain,
I think you said last time we spoke that the Pythons had a similar sort of,
Pythons
they were pushed to the back.
Absolutely. And famously Red Dwarf with God, what's the swear word in Red Dwarf? What's
Smeg.
Smeg.
Yeah.
And
Goit.
the boys, the boys use Gwenlyn.
Oh, Gwenlyn,
because
yeah.
In Red Dwarf, the boys used Gwenlyn as a swear word in the first couple of series, because a man called Gareth Gwenlyn was head of comedy who turned down the script. So they used Gwenlyn as a swear word. So there was a. It's just what it is, I mean, you're going to be. It's not four-letter comedy. So I'll tell you the one scene we got. The one scene that in the end Jim said you've got to cut it. And I'm certain that he only said it because he had to at some point say, of course I looked at them all, I cut a scene. That's the only reason. It was no more gross than hundreds of other things in the thing.
I think you might be about to queue up our next.
Oh, have you got it? Have you got it?
If it's the one I'm thinking of. It
The
seemed
teddy
like-
bears. The
Yeah,
teddy
yeah,
bears.
yeah. Well, so it seemed like a lot of the people at the BBC had dirty minds, misconstruing words and.
Oh, well, that's a different story, the Dirty Mind story.
And such as they misconstrued, they thought Vivian was having sex with the floor, and
That's exactly right. In the party scene, just after the Tampax, so we got over the Tampax argument, and then they said, okay, but you've got to cut out Viv fucking the floor. Yeah. What? We all literally, what? I said, well, he's fucking the floor. He's doing press-ups to impress the girl.
Now, you got to keep that shot, but there was, as you said, there was one scene that you had to lose, which is...
He had to come out with one win,
That's the next scene the next clip we're going to show now. This is something that had to get cut by the BBC, or the BBC insisted on being cut.
So the joke is obviously that Rik's got two teddy bears in his bedroom. That's the bloody joke. And they're fucking, so...
They're having more sex than him. Yeah.
They're having more sex. Well, thank you. They're having more sex. You should have written the essay. That's exactly the point. They're having more sex than him. So, but you know what? Sometimes you take the win, don't you? And we just said, okay, we'll take it up.
Okay, so let's move on to the violence now. We're going to play one of the clips you selected that sums up the violence quite well.
Why did I choose a violent clip?
That's actually quite a technically challenging shot, isn't it? Could you talk us through how that's directed and put together, like the long, like the focus?
So it's the last episode of all, summer holiday, when they've done their exams. You know that time at the end of uni, you've done your exams. In fact, the truth is most people go home, don't they? But they haven't got homes to go to. So they're kind of sitting around listless waiting for the results. And of course, when they get the results, they are the bottom 4 students in the whole country.
In the world.
In the whole world.
In the whole world, in the whole world. Lenny Henry brings the letter in, and of course, Rik is bottom, isn't he? I think.
Yes.
So they're sitting around and they're bored as hell, and Viv is being just completely annoying and trying to suggest. And he says, "Well, come on, we'll have a game of cricket. We'll have a game of cricket." So what I loved, we didn't go outside the house very often, but we had these big studios at the BBC, and so the designer had always got a garden there if we needed it. So he for this episode he built the whole bloody garden back out there, and Fred Wright, the lighting designer, put his bright, lovely British summer sunshine. It was just lovely. And then I just said to the camera, "That's a very, very difficult shot to shoot because he's holding him in focus for it's about twice as long as this room. It's about twice that length, and he's holding him in focus as he comes right up, and he's got to be in focus right in foreground when he hits him on the head. So it's a brilliant piece of work, probably by Ron Green or Roger Fenner, I would think. And then of course we have the fire, which again you just wouldn't. There's no way they'd let you set people on fire in a studio with an audience. And
it adds to the cartoon nature of it all.
Cartoon,
It's
because
so
then he's
sweet.
fine.
You never know
they
what's
put
going
it
to
out
happen
and he's
next.
fine.
It's incredible. And
They're not fine after the bus goes over the cliff.
Well, yes, and you were mentioning earlier about the bed falling through the ceiling. So let's play the clip. This is the time that apparently the late great Rik Mayall confessed to being frightened.
I mean, you wouldn't do one of those stunts now, not 3 in a
Back to
sequence
back,
of about a minute. I mean,
So I've heard you actually managed to keep the bed hidden from the audience before
so
it
the
happened.
bed. I mean, you've been in a TV studio, mostly. It's probably twice as high as this, I would think, where the lighting rig points down, And so the bed was rigged. We had to build a special scaffolding. The upstairs obviously wasn't upstairs. It was just built alongside on the floor level in the thing. And you just have a little bit of a raise to get the stairs going up and down. So it's all level. But for this one, we had to have the bed above. So the boys built a scaffolding way outside the set, right out there with a trap on it, with the bed on it. And then we had to hang a drape because obviously the audience would have seen it the minute they came in. So we had to hang a black drape. So it had to be high because it had to be above the lights so that we could hide it and drop down. And that's why I said I'll do it first. And then Rik and Ade did it, and then they did it in the dress and so on. I think we only did it 3 times because it was, we didn't want to do it too often. But Rik said to me afterwards, he said, well, he didn't tell me, he told me much later. He said, God, that was really scary. Because I was saying to them, you were brilliant guys, you just absolutely carried on, which was the whole joke.
Apparently they were winded.
I think
Did he tell
Rik
you
was
more
badly
so than that?
winded, but Ade landed on his coccyx, and he told me much later, years later, he told me that he'd actually had, genuine.
It's incredible commitment from them to carry on with the scene as it is. With
And
so
the
much
rest of the
energy.
show never said nothing to me on the night. But
So-
the audience, again, by this time, they just could not believe what had happened again.
Hear a
I mean, we
gasp.
couldn't.
You hear a gasp from someone as it
Oh, you
drops
can
for a
hear it,
second.
and the applause was just you had to, you cut it way down there in the show.
So the writers always famously wanted to finish the show after 2 series, and you did it in a very spectacular way, leaving absolutely no wiggle room to bring anyone back or anything like that. Having been made homeless and then robbing a bank, The Bachelor Boys are riding a stolen bus to freedom when this happens. That's a hell of a way to end the series, isn't it? As a producer and director, when that script lands on your desk, what do you think when you receive?
Well, by
it?
that time, you just think, well, this will be fine. I'll talk to the boys. What's the name of the stunt coordinator? Gareth? No, I can't remember his name. He did all our stunts. So you can drive a bus off a cliff. That's no, I mean, there was no CGI. You knew when you read it, well, we're going to have to drive a bus off a cliff. So that's in the chalk pits down on the South Downs somewhere, and it's an actual bus. I've actually got, the little triangle thing on the front of buses. I've actually got the one off there.
Amazing.
Because we all rushed in afterwards and tried to grab it. But the only strange thing about it was supposed to be all in one shot, which is obviously slow mode. So this is shot on film. So the way you slow mo in those days, you shoot 2 or 3 times faster than when you play it slow mo. If you see what I mean. So it was shot in slow mo, and it was supposed to explode when it hit the deck. The whole point was it was all going to be in one shot, and it would go up. We were all standing there, and it didn't. So then you've got the quandary of, well,
how
is
soon
it
do
about
you
to
go?
go
Yeah.
up? So we said, Ed, would you just go and have a look at the thing? So Ed started to walk towards it, and the visual effects guy, Dave Havard, said, get out the fuck are you doing? Get back, I'll go in. And he went in and he worked out what had happened. So we then had to do the separate close-up, and then I can't remember who came up with the line. Oh, phew, that was close.
Yes,
Which
an
is
extra gag out of
It's
it.
absolutely brilliant.
one of the guys on location said, well, we should just do phew.
It feels like that. I never knew that there was ever a fuck up. It feels like that's exactly what was written. The
It
view
feels
was
that
close,
would be the
double
last
bluff.
line, wouldn't it, of the whole
Yeah.
series? But it wasn't. It was made up because the shot
Was
didn't
that ambitious ending the plan from the beginning of series 2? Was it because it was bigger budget?
Rik particularly always said if 12 Hours was good enough for Cleese, it's good enough for us, and we're never doing more than 12. And there was big pressure by this time. The BBC, who'd made them write that essay before they commissioned the second series, were desperate for a third series.
Yeah. So I knew they wanted to kill them, but was from the off, was it we're going to drive them off a cliff, and the cliff joke, was that there? Or
No,
was
yes.
that came
So
later.
Having decided that it had to be definitive, although what's definitive, but I mean, Dallas and Bobby out of the shower and so on, but they wanted it as definitive as possible. Then the cliff joke just gave itself, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because, what better than to drive over off a cliff?
Yes. It's poetic.
It's poetic.
It's as poetic as any of Rick's poems.
I would say that Ben was, they all wrote the shows, but Ben pretty well wrote the pilot episode himself.
Okay.
And I would say he wrote Bambi and Summer Holiday. That last were pretty much Ben's scripts.
Right, so the series went out on a bang. Clearly there was a good response to it. We'd like to read out a few little nuggets we found in the archive, such as this glowing letter from a BBC colleague. This is from someone, it looks like it's signed from Mitch, but we couldn't work out who it was. Dear Paul, just want to say congratulations on last night's programme. I knew, given the people involved, that it would be funny and inventive, but I was pleased to see that it hung together so well. The first episode is always the most difficult in terms of characterisation. Sorry, this is from earlier in the series. But the problem was overcome by accentuating the difficulty via Lexi. The characters are very strong and will, I believe, have different appeal, which is a good thing. The development of Mike's character is especially important since he provides, or will provide, the situation for the comedy that will come from Rik, Nigel and Ade, much in the same way that Sid James was always creating the situations for the early Hancock. The comparison with Hancock is valid, because in Rik, you've got the best British comedian since Hancock. And if you don't think me patronising, it's really to your credit that you put your head on the line, to mix metaphors, with the sitcom. I honestly think that if the BBC hierarchy can keep faith with the young ones and give it time to develop, albeit in a late night slot on 2, within 2 years you will be producing the cult series of the 80s. This was written during or after the first series. Congratulations again, and please pass on my congrats to the team, including Marcus, Jackie and Ed. Thank you for the tickets. Do you remember who that was?
No, I'm trying to look at the thing. I mean, obviously he's somebody who's asked for tickets, and he's been kind enough to write a thank you letter. I know, I don't remember who it was. Wasn't that nice? Yeah.
That was a very eloquently written letter.
Yeah.
Let's read the next one.
Where'd you get these things? I
All in the archive.
Dear Paul Jackson.
So we should say this is a fan letter written in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dear Paul Jackson, me and my flatmates think The Young Ones is brilliant. It's the only programme that makes us laugh all week. Keep up the good work, or there'll be a brick through the screen, okay? Love, Paul.
Paul's misspelt, I think. P-O-R-L.
He's from London via Liverpool, apparently.
We
Yeah.
got a lot of. We didn't
see that
nice letters. This was the day when, again, you know, the old BBC. If you were producing a show, the correspondence all came to you. You didn't go to a
sent a response
complaints
to this
unit
one.
and a letters unit.
Yeah.
And a,
Yeah.
it all
We've
came
got a
to us.
response that you sent.
Oh,
as
did I
well.
send a response?
Yes. Will you get the next bit?
You gave a very classy response to this.
Many thanks for the kind letter. Hold back on the brick.
Paul, well, I took him on his own spelling, yeah.
I love that you took on the spelling.
But you know,
It's brilliant.
here's the thing. In those days, if you ran a show at the BBC, it was your fucking show. And you were responsible for it. And so we used to answer the letters when people wrote in, and sometimes with something like The Young Ones, there was a lot.
Yeah.
And I
could
sat there late
imagine.
at night with Jackie, who he's referring there to Jackie Tyler and Ed Bye, who were the production assistant, and Ed, in the previous letter. And you sat there and you answered these bloody letters. Now you tried to keep it short and sweet.
Yeah.
But you did answer the letters.
Oh, we
Yeah,
got the best one yet.
brevity is
We
the
got the
source
best
of
one.
wit, and you did also have to deal with some complaints occasionally. If we can look at the next letter, please.
I haven't seen this. So.
It reads, "Dear Mr. Jackson, I write at the request of one of our business units, Royal Sovereign, who for many years have manufactured and marketed Stephen's Golden Gum. I understand that in the course of a programme called The Young Ones on BBC Two television on the evening of Tuesday, 9th of November, a man was shown as glue sniffing. It was apparently clear to a number of people watching the programme that the glue being sniffed was in fact a bottle of Stephen's Golden Gum. Not only is the shape of the bottle and the colour of its contents well known and significant, but I understand that the name of the product on the bottle was clearly visible. We are concerned that our product should have been used so obviously in such an undesirable context. You will, I hope, understand our reaction when I tell you that the product in question is not in fact based on a volatile solvent, but is water-based, conforms to all current UK safety standards and regulations, and is marketed as such. Showing the product in its context of glue sniffing could be damaging to its reputation. Yours sincerely," and it is, you can't see it on the screen there, it's M.S. Painter, Secretary. And you did reply to this, Paul, and we've given you your reply to read out for everyone.
I haven't seen this. I'll look at it in a minute. This is what I was saying. So even something like that, well, nowadays that would be really seriously commercially threatening. I mean, apparently we've shown somebody glue sniffing a solvent that is not capable of having that effect. I mean, the lawyers would have been involved. It would have gone, it would have been a whole furore about it, even just receiving that letter, even if they didn't do any more about it. I don't know what I said, but I don't think I probably took it very seriously. Do I?
That's what you said.
It does sound like you've had some legal.
Maybe I have asked somebody.
Whispered in your ear before you've written.
Dear Mr. Painter, with reference to your letter of November 25th, I'm sorry to hear that during the incident you describe, it was possible to recognise a bottle of Stephen's Golden Gum. I was most careful during the recording of the insert to ensure that the brand name was not in fact visible. You had to do that. You weren't allowed to show brand names on, when we had a Steinway piano, we had to put black tape over the Steinway. You couldn't show names. I was, however, unaware that the shape of the bottle was unique and identifying mark. So obviously I'd made sure you didn't see the thing, but I didn't know the bottle was. I fully understand your concern, and I can only say that if your product has been shown in an undesirable context, then this was against my specific intentions, and I regret any inconvenience this may have caused your company. There was certainly no intention on our part to insinuate that sniffing of Stephen's Golden Gum could induce an hallucinatory effect. So, but I mean, that's not really taking it very seriously, is it? When you think they could have sued us, I mean, I don't remember it at all. I mean,
so Paul, we're barreling through your back catalogue here, so we're going to move on to Filthy Rich and Cat Flap in 1987, which of course featured 3 of the 4 Young Ones, was written by Ben Elton. There's a specific clip you chose for Filthy. Let's have a watch of it and then we'll have a talk. Superb. We heard that Chris Barry was loosely basing his character on you there,
Chris
Paul.
Barry
Is
is
there any truth in
absolutely
that?
doing an impression of me in the gallery, basically. I was famous for, look, it's a very pressurized situation. I'm from directing those shows, and we never had enough time, and I used to get quite wound up, and you've always got a pencil to mark up your script, and famously, Jackie used to bring jars of pencils in, because I used to break them and throw them at the screen in the gallery. And the other thing I used to do on Jackie's advice, Jackie became godmother to my daughter. She's a very good friend of ours. When I sat down in the beginning of the day, she'd say, "Take your shoes off." Why? Take your shoes off. Because the BBC galleries were one level up from the studio floor, and to get down, you had to go down a cast iron, wrought iron spiral stairway. And of course, I'd go screaming out onto the floor and get onto the iron thing, and then I'd have to slow down because I couldn't run down the iron thing. So yeah, it's an impression of me. Yeah. Not quite that, but I hope so.
Is that why you chose that clip then? Because you?
No, I chose the clip because I just think. So here's the thing about Filthy Rich. So the whole point was, we've done the young ones. They've been students. They've now moved on into work, into the world of work. And Richie is this low-life, failed, bottom-of-the-barrel comedy performer. Eddie is his minder, and Nigel is his agent, Filthy Ralph. And so that was the premise. So Ben wrote the whole 6, and we shot them up in Manchester, and we edited them. And then I had one of my periodic massive rows with Rik, which was easy enough to do, but normally you get over them and make up. But so I put together the running order, and I put this episode first, A, because it's the funniest of the 6, but B, because it absolutely states we're now in showbiz land. This is who Richie is, this is who Eddie is, here's the agent. The Nolans are also in this. They sneak into Nolan's dressing room and start sniffing their dresses and so on. I mean, and then they end up doing a number with the Nolans. So it was showbiz, right?
Yeah.
And Rik said, absolutely not. I want the Milkman episode. If you know the shows, I want the Milkman episode to go out first, where a milkman turns up and they accidentally kill him. And then they have to kill 2 more milkmen who are sent to find him. So they end up with 3 dead milkmen in the flat. And 4 dead milkmen in the flat. And he said, no, it's got to be that. And at first I couldn't. I said, Rik, this is ridiculous. The milkman is the most like the young ones. It's them in the flat. Nigel's hardly in it. It's you and Ade, you're Rik and Vivian, and you're murdering milkmen. It's the young one's plot. No, it's got to be. And I sat in a pub in Islington where we used to do our business meetings when he was living, and he said, I tell you, if you look, you're the producer, you're the BBC, you put it out in whatever order you want, but I'll never speak to you again if you don't put Milkman out first. That's it, we're done. And I think probably rightly, because he meant it, and I wouldn't have worked with him again, and I wanted to. But also, I just knew it was the wrong decision. And you know what? I knew why he was doing it. Do any of you know the show? Sounds a bit rude. So what does it open with? It opens with a 40-second monologue from Nigel. That's why he didn't want it to go out.
Right.
Oh, okay.
I never said that to him, but
Right.
Okay, so you wanted to be the.
he didn't want Nigel to
front
open
and
the show like
centre.
it was Nigel's
Yeah.
show,
We're going to move on to Bottom, and I think, should we watch the clip and then we can talk a little bit about Paul making sure that the pilot made it to TV. So if we can play clip 14, please.
How brilliant is that final line? It really sums up like the whole sort of ethos of the show that permeates through the whole series, and
that is the pilot episode, of course, which, can we just clarify with you then, Paul? You produced and directed Contest, didn't you? The Miss World episode.
I think I produced I definitely produced the first couple of episodes.
Yeah.
But I think I directed the pilot, but then they reshot it, didn't they? So the one that was broadcast was directed by Ed.
No. So
then maybe
that is the pilot was Contest, but it was aired in 3rd position, and Smells went out first.
It was Ed's show. Ed ran that show.
Yeah.
was
But
like
we were
2
just
year
wanting to
difference, I
be
think.
sure that you had, because I think your name is on the credits on Contest.
It is, yes.
Yeah,
It is.
so,
But as director or as producer?
Just says at the end, produced by.
Yeah, no, I think probably Ed directed it then.
Oh, right, okay.
I
But
think.
you, of course, provided an office for them to write Bottom in.
Yes. So what happened was, by this time I was sort of on my way to becoming an executive. I was running my own production company, and we were really busy. We were doing a lot of work, and Rik and Ade came to me and said, well, first of all, they said, we've got a new idea. Do you want to do it? And I said, look, I'd love to, but I don't think I can.
Mm-hmm.
And at this time, Dawn and Jenny had become incredibly successful, and they had set up this thing, because normally writers work at home, and they have a beer and have a fag and whatever. And Dawn and Jenny had set up this idea of hiring an office and going into work in the morning at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, finishing at 5, and you did a day's work and you produced so many pages a day. And it had worked really well for them, and Rik and Ade had observed this and wanted to do the same thing. So they said to me, well, look, you've got these big suite of offices. We were producing about 6 hours a week at the time. Can we have an office then? So we gave them an office, and in fact, throughout Bottom, it says in association with Melgate Television, which was the contractual credit for giving that office. And we used to make sure they've got tea and coffee, and if they wanted to ask any questions about, whatever it might be.
Did you sort of keep abreast of production as it happened?
And I kind of did, although, again, there was a gap between the pilot and the series, and by the time the series was going on, but I did sell it to Yentl. That was the one thing. Once they started writing it and I started reading it, I mean, to be honest, I didn't think the BBC would be a difficult sell, because they were desperate for a third Young Ones, and then they were desperate for a second Filthy Rich. And then, so I took it to Yentl, and he said, yeah, I mean, almost without reading, he said, yeah, of course we'll have it. Does it have to be called Bottom? And I said, Alan, it's not, that's your mind, they're the bottom of the pile. The point is they're the bottom of the trash can, the bottom of the barrel. And he said, yeah, does it have to be called Bottom? And I said, okay, well, I'll ask Rik. And I went back and asked Rik and Ade, and Rik said, yes, now it does, because he's asked that question, now it doesn't. And funny enough, Ed had exactly the same conversation about a year later when he was doing it. But I just look at that clip, you guys know it's a hobby also mine. Comedy is so often kind of underrated, and it's, what is it? It's just frippery and it's clowns and it's not important, and it's easy. And you look at those two guys who wrote, and and again, Rik's reputation as a writer is kind of mixed, because he normally had help, wrote, but him and Ade wrote that completely, all 18 episodes on their own, Rik and Ade, as indeed they wrote the stage shows. And I think the poignancy and that trick that the best comedy does so brilliantly, where it takes you down the dark side, and then it goes boom, and of course the laugh's even bigger because you've gone, oh my God, and it really, same as horror, they just, and then they smack you in the face with a wet fish. So that moment when, they are fucked. I mean, they are completely the bottom of the barrel. They've got no money. They haven't even got a television that they can watch. Yeah. They're fucked. And Eddie seriously suggests, well, it might be fun to, why don't you gas yourself? Or at least give us something to watch. And I think it's brilliantly written. I think it's brilliantly performed. I think the two of them, you just want to cry for them, don't you? You just, and yet 2 seconds later, they've been completely inappropriate in a pub with two women calling them lesbians because they won't go and sit at the table. And yet they
were masters of the craft.
They were absolutely masters of their craft. And television does a lot of eating itself, and a lot of shows have been made about these and various other shows. But I think probably the best one, Channel 5 did a thing called Bottom Exposed.
Right, yeah.
And I think that's probably the best one I've seen.
UK TV.
UK TV, you're dead right. I think that's probably the best one I was ever involved in and Ade, it's not, which is some time after Rik died, but Ade very, very rarely agrees to do interviews, and I think he felt this one because it was Bottom and that really was their show. And he did it, and he's incredibly moving, and he speaks incredibly powerfully about Rik and what he meant as a friend and what he meant as a performer. And here we are, 10 years later, whatever it is, with a whole bloody festival, 75 events going on today, because this one man was born here. He was, we did have our fallings out, and we had our disagreements, and he could be difficult, but he was an absolute fucking genius. There's no question about it. He was an absolute genius. And he was a brilliant actor. his comic timing, him and Ade and his on his own, was perfection. He could play pathos and comedy. He was a charisma. I tell you, being in his company, you know, there are people. Princess Diana was one. You know, Sophia Loren. Just because I haven't. They walk into a room, and even if you're not looking, you know, they're coming behind you. The whole room just goes like that. And he was one of those people. He was a magic human being.
Yeah, that leads nicely into what I'm about to ask. So in 2004, Paul, you received an honorary doctorate from Exeter University. And also up on stage with you that day was Rik, who was also being given an honorary doctorate that officially made him Dr. the Rik Mayall. Now, people in this room are probably familiar with the 5 mantras that he gave people in the room that day. But when these clips are often played on social media, it's usually just cut down. And what doesn't get played often enough is his first part of the speech that leads up to this. So this will be clip 17, please, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I may, 28 years ago, that man, Paul Jackson, stand up, Paul, show them yourself. That's the man. 28 years ago, that man, Paul Jackson, walked into a fledgling nightclub in London called the Comedy Store and asked me if I'd like to be on television. Now that was a very big deal in those days. There were only 3 channels, so if you went on telly, you'd be famous for life overnight. Paul, I want to take this rare opportunity to thank you, formally and publicly, for my life.
You know,
How does it feel watching that back?
he was. Could you send me that clip? Because it's not.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
If you look at the YouTube clip, it starts when it cuts that bit out and starts with his speech. And I mean, I know it happened. I've not got a copy of it. He was a complicated, difficult, brilliant, extraordinary man. And when he said that, I was just complete, because it's bollocks, of course. I mean, he would have, of course, he would have been a big star without me. But I was there I remember I was there with him when Stephen Fry walked out of Cellmates, you know, and we happened to be recording. He was playing Toad of Toad Hall for me in a animated version of Wind in the Willows. And he said to me then, "You're always here when things are going on." You know, we did have a very close relationship on, off, and crossing paths, but we did have a very special relationship. And it was very moving when he said that, because I was very nervous about doing I had to do his validation, or whatever it's called. I had to do the speech. And I worked on it very hard because it was really. Now, this is after his accident, right? His quad bike accident. And when he definitely changed. I mean, and one of the many things that changed about him was he lost his social editor. He lost his self-editor. In fact, in some ways, he went back to the maverick, mad 22-year-old that he had been when he first came down to London, where he would do anything, say anything, and he didn't care. And he kind of went back to that, but in an even more unrestrained form. So let me tell you what had happened just before that very nice moment. For some reason, the Chancellor of Exeter University at the time was the children's entertainer Floella Benjamin. She was the Chancellor, who I knew quite well. And we were on the afternoon session. He's going to get his doctorate. And so I'm waiting in the corridor for him to arrive. I've got there early, make sure everything's okay. And Floella is standing in the full regalia, you know, the hat and the gold braids and all the business, with 5 or 6 heads of school who are going to be presented that afternoon. You know, greybeards and men and women, and, you know, they're all standing in a huddle with all the glory on. And Rik comes in, and I said, "Hi, you know, you okay?" And, "Yeah, come on, it's really going to be fun." And I said, "You must know Floella." He said, "I don't actually, I've never met her." So I said, "Would you like me to introduce you? You know, she might like to say hello before you meet her on stage." "Oh, yeah, it'd be great." So I walked up with him, kind of slightly break into this circle of very, you know, dignified. And I said, "Floella, I just thought you might like to say hi to Rik. You know, I gather you've not met him." And you. She said, "Oh, yes, lovely, Rik." And Rik said, "Big fan of your work. Always watch the show. Box of tissues at hand, of course." I'm standing there. She
That's
looks at me.
brilliant.
She knows exactly what he said. I think the old duffers weren't quite sure what had been said. And I grabbed him and pulled him away. I mean, and that
You
was...
grabbed him and pulled him off?
That was...
It's a good job the tissues were on hand, Paul.
Normally at half time they only pull us off. Yeah, no. It's an old rugby joke. Oh, they only give us oranges at our place.
That's brilliant because you can see Floella introduce Rik just before he comes on there, and she says he's a very naughty man.
Did she?
So now we know exactly what she means.
He was, but you know
Fantastic.
what? She didn't take offence. I honestly don't think the other people quite understood what he'd said. But she didn't take offence, and I said to her afterwards, "I'm so sorry." She said, "It's Rik, you know." But the VC of the deputy, you know, the bloke who runs the union, bloke called now Sir Steve Smith, he had said to me when I got there in the lunchtime, he said, "Paul, is Rik, you know, is he okay after the accident?" And I said, "Yeah, he's fine. You know, he's working." And why? He said, "Well, we started from last year. We started broadcasting this live. It goes out on a live feed. Do you think it will be okay?" And I said, "Look, Steve, I have never known him, and it's true, I never knew. I've never known him to misbehave professionally. You know, when he knows he's on camera. So I think you're absolutely safe." But I said, "You know, I would have somebody sitting on the button if I were you, sitting on a delay button or something. Can you do that?" And he said yes, and he didn't need to. He did the whole speech, and then he finished at the very end, "Go and have a fucking good life," he said at the very end. And he got a massive cheer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so fantastic to be on this stage talking about Rik at the Rik Mayall Comedy Festival with you, Paul Jackson. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm afraid we've run out of time pretty much, so we're not going to be able to do the quiz that we're able to do. But we might do it at the St Andrews Hotel, where we're going to be with you at 6. We'll continue this conversation there, guys.
If you love Rik, please come to St Andrews. I was talking to the guys, because of Ben's autobiography, I was talking to Ben about Happy Families, which is the show that we did. I'll explain at 6 o'clock. But Rik stars in one episode of it. I'll explain how it works later on. And it's a classic Rik, over the top, mad, completely outrageous.
We saw a taster of it at the very
You saw
top.
a little bit of it, the priest you saw there. So, well, you tell me it's on YouTube. I mean, it's very difficult to get hold of. So if you want to have a look at the whole episode, and I'll tell you what it's about, please come to St
I think
Andrews.
the copy on YouTube is not great. I think the one you brought in is a bit better. But
I bought a bootleg that I found on the net. Yes.
Anyone who's got any questions that you'd like to ask Paul that you've probably missed out, come along to see Paul, and we end
Tonight
with a bit
at
of a
6
Q&A.
at St Andrews Hotel.
So thank you for joining us here today, Paul, and all of you guys here. We hope you have a fantastic festival.
Can we have a final round of applause, please,
Costume
for
competition.
Mr. Comedy God, Paul Jackson.
Thank you for coming.